few rounds of blackjack.
Benny was a visionary about this. He realized what could eventually happen with the poker, and he did everything he could to support it.
Binion convinced his partner, J.K. Hustles, to let him place a superstar poker player in the lobby of the Las Vegas club.
There was no doubt who the best poker player was. And Doyle even says when he first met Johnny Moss that he was probably the best poker player he ever saw. Johnny Moss was definitely the Tiger Woods and the Michael Jordan or whatever all rolled up into one when it came to poker at the time.
He had Johnny Moss come out and play Nick the Greek back in, I think, the 50s, maybe even the 40s. And that caused quite a stir.
The one-on-one game between Johnny Moss and New York gambler Nick the Greek Dandelos is the poker equivalent of the Beatles performing on the Ed Sullivan Show. Parked in Binion's front room, Moss and the Greek locked horns with each other, and no one was giving up. $1 million changed hands. Weeks went by, then $2 million. Months went by. The crowd around the game grew 10 deep.
Finally opens up after 90 minutes of backtracking, and here's how it looked.
It took 5 months of play before Moss finally bled the Greek of his last dollar. The Greek knew he was beat. He reached over to shake Moss's hand and delivered the most famous line in poker history. "Mr. Moss," said the Greek, "I'm afraid I'm going to have to let you go."
I don't know just how much Moss did beat him out of over that period of time. Probably we'll never know just how much it really was, but it was by far the biggest game ever, you might say.
With the explosion of Moss versus the Greek still echoing down the strip, Benny told his partner that no-limit gambling was their future. But his partner was too scared of removing the limit. So Benny walked away and started his own joint, Binion's Horseshoe. During the 1950s and 60s, the Horseshoe became the capital of no-limit betting, the Vegas within Vegas.
He would take any bets. You know, if you wanted to bet $1 million, he'd book the action. No other casino would. He was a true, rebel in that sense.
But even though poker had been legitimized inside Vegas, Binion wasn't satisfied. He wanted to take his business nationwide. He needed the great communicator, television.
The odds are 8 to 1 against
In
him.
1970, Binion's brainchild, the spark that forever changed the game, was called the World Series of Poker.
And he said, "Gee whiz, Lem, why don't we have a poker tournament?" And I said, "Well, hell, it sounds like a good idea to me."
And it is basically Benny's buddies getting together, anteing up $10,000 each.
Thank you, sir.
And actually voting on who played the best, who was the most deserving of the trophy after they played together for 4 or 5 days.
2 guys from the Cleveland Plain Dealer came in and had heard about it, and they did an article on it. And then after that, we said, well, we can get some publicity out of this. And we hired Jimmy Snyder to get us some publicity, and that was the first year that it got on TV.
Pretty soon, it became a freeze-out in which people bought in for $10,000 and played until one of them had all the chips. And that version of no-limit tournament poker, the freeze-out system, is the one that is completely taken over the poker world today.
That was it. That was the beginning of respectability of poker.
The media loved the poker players and vice versa. Suddenly, that dusty old gang of Texas rounders were cult American heroes. After decades spent ducking the law, the gamblers were hailed as latter-day Horatio Algers, flush with fame and hard-earned fortune.
People begin to see that you might not be just a dyed-in-the-wool outlaw or villain just because you played poker.
And wouldn't you know, it was none other than Benny Binion, the most dyed-in-the-wool outlaw of them all, who transformed the game of poker into a respectable business. But Benny's beloved game wasn't finished growing. He may have brought poker to the rest of the country, but changes made in the 1990s would introduce the game to the world. It's getting late, less than half an hour until today's games are over. Chip, Chow, and Todd Brunson, Doyle's son, are doing well. So is Phil Ivey. That's rap music he's listening to, by the way. Ivey, who's only 27, Started playing poker in Atlantic City, and it wasn't too long before he was playing against and beating the best 7-card stud poker players in the world. Chow is in with 6,000. Barry follows. Todd Brunson folds. And it looks like Ivy's going to match the bet. At this level, a typical hand takes less than 2 minutes to play. There's the flop. Barry's in with 10,000. But it's too much for Chow, who folds. Barry stays big time.
I raised 40.
Here's the final card. Uh-oh, Barry comes up short. And Phil takes the pot of nearly $80,000 with a couple of spades.
The big winner for the year among those players most likely will be in the $3, $4, $5 million range. And the big loser might be losing $2 or $3 million.
That's certainly the thing that's changed the most since the inception of the World Series of Poker. There's a lot more money to be won and lost. In fact, that's the story of the World Series in the 1980s and 1990s. There's a lot more of everything.
In the first World Series, I believe there were only 7 of them. And that number has obviously increased exponentially because of Benny's son, Jack, introducing the idea of satellites in the early 1980s.
Benny Binion's son, Jack's idea to create satellite tournaments took its cue from golf's U.S. Open. Every duffer in America is invited to try out for the Open by entering a local tournament. The final field is winnowed down from a cast of tens of thousands. Jack Binion applied the same idea to poker. A seat at the World Series is now available to anyone who wins a satellite play-in tournament, and the buy-in price is lower.
So that by 1983, you have regular folks, non-Texas road gamblers, who don't have $10,000 in their pocket when they show up playing in smaller tournaments, $225 buy-in satellites, with the ability to win a $10,000 seat and then compete with the people who've been playing high stakes 52 weeks a year. That's an epoch-making turn of events. 1983, Tom McAvoy goes heads up for the championship against Rodney Peete, both players having arrived in town with way less than 10 grand and then walking away with the top prize.
And personality-wise, modern times have ushered into the winner's circle a very different kind of poker player. Gone are the days of the Texas outlaws. The age of the internet has given rise to a different breed of shark. Today's champion is often a highly educated, numbers-crunching bookworm.
There's many, many excellent players who have come from an academic background, and very few now who have come from the pool hustling background, which is where they used to come from.
Occasionally, one will come along with the skills of both. Now, those are the tough players.
You have to have simply more guts than anyone you've ever known.
Stephen Lipscomb is a prototypical example of how the poker universe is expanding. He founded the World Poker Tour in 2001 and televises the final round of its 14 tournaments. Each one features a large cash pot for the winner.
You have a shot of winning $1 million first prize, and it happens constantly that at our final tables, 1, 2, sometimes even 3 of the people who are sitting there are rank amateurs. You can show up around the country on any given month, play in that tournament, and on a given day, if the cards fall right, you have a chance of winning.
All right, deal.
Just about the toughest player to emerge from the rapidly evolving poker scene is Danish-born Gus Hansen, who has won millions with a very different kind of poker style. You could describe it as blunt and confrontational. Hansen plays nearly every hand, meaning he's always in the action.
He would never give up the pot, this man.
And he's always there with a big raise, a ploy designed to intimidate players too timid to stay in the pot.
There's definitely a lot more risk involved because you put more money into the pot a lot of times. And it really puts your opponent to the test. He has to make a decision. Is he raising just to see where I'm at, or does he really have a very, very good hand.
Hansen